Professional Development Center here on campus. And I wanted to thank you all for joining us. Definitely want to thank our panelists for taking time out of their day to be here and share their experience with you. And I wanted to thank Emily as well. She's one of our College Core Fellows who's primarily been coordinating this event. So I'm going to go ahead and let her introduce herself as well as get us started. If you do have any questions for our panelists, please send it in the chat. I'll be monitoring that. Just let me know if you have any concerns, questions, and we'll go from there. Go ahead, Emily, take it away.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the career panel, Explore Careers in Teaching English, which will mainly be focused in TESOL. I will be moderating today. My name's Emily, as stated before. And yeah, I'll be the one saying the questions and I'll pass it on to the speak panelists so you can introduce yourself, your current job and your experience in TESOL if you want. You want to go first, Sandra?
Sure. So hi, my name is Sandra Lambert. I am a full-time instructor at CSU Stanislaus. I've been teaching there since 2015. I am an alumni. I did complete my undergraduate education there at CSU Stanislaus. I also got my master's degree there. So yeah, I teach composition courses primarily, a couple of inquiry courses, stretch courses as well.
Okay, are we doing introductions so I can continue? Okay, sorry if I missed that. My name is Alfredo Gauna. I also went to school with Sandra. I graduated in 2012 from CSU Stanislaus. Currently, I'm working as a world language course designer for the edtech company Corsello. They make high school online courses for a lot of school districts across the United States. And I'm also a TA assistant, a teaching assistant at the University of California, Merced, as I pursue my PhD. Most of my experience in TESOL has been abroad, some domestic experience, but that's more English, ELD, but TESOL specifically abroad in Asia and a little bit in Europe.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mirta Maldonado. I am not an alumni, but I do come from the English department. I think both Sandra and Alfredo, right? I came here into 2016. I have experience teaching TESOL in Puerto Rico for many years, and then TESOL mostly in K through 12, sort of ELD sheltered instruction in Texas, San Antonio. And then I also had the opportunity to work with curriculum development and assessment for ESP, English for Specific Purposes program, specifically for business and medical English, and also for international students, those who not necessarily pass the TOEFL, but they do have good enough scores to go in, but with some courses that it's going to help them develop those literacy skills so they can just continue on in their program. So that's pretty much my experience. And I am now here, and I'm also the director of the TESOL program in the Department of English.
Thank you. I'll move on to the first question. It's for anyone who would like to answer it. How would you explain TESOL to someone who has never heard of it?
I'll try not to talk too much, so please, Sandra or Mirta, please cut me off. I'm not, but I would just say that it stands for Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages. We encounter those situations. It's called a lot of different names. Sometimes we think about ELD, ESL, EAL. It really depends on how they're framing it, but essentially is that we take into practice a lot of the second language acquisition theories to make English comprehensible input where students are able to acquire the language.
I think if I may add, I think the way I would define TESOL would be not just a resource, but I would say a way of making English learning accessible, if that makes sense. And that's why I like that acronym TESOL, right? Because it really includes anything that has to do with teaching English as a second language, but most importantly to speakers of other languages. So that includes teaching adults here in, for example, refugee programs, and includes K through 12, adult learners, right? So I think it's the idea of making language accessible to whoever would want to learn English, and mostly in the US because we're here, but maybe even EFL a little bit, right? Because one of the things that we don't necessarily discuss too much in TESOL, right? It's EFL. We would want to make EFL a little bit more contextually based, if that makes sense. So I think that TESOL could also include that little bit of under its umbrella, right? Even English as a foreign language for sure. But bottom line, making it accessible to speakers.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on to the next question. A little two-part. When did you receive your TESOL certification, and would you mind telling us a bit about the process of acquiring the certification?
I guess I'll go first. So I got my TESOL certificate in 2013 when 2013 when I finished my undergraduate education. So my major was in English with a concentration in TESOL. And so I know that consisted of a number of units. It was like 19 units or something like that. And a lot of those courses really focus on teaching English, as that second language. And so the approach is very different from teaching, composition or writing. And so the courses, I think, they were a little challenging because it definitely, you think you know everything about English, and then you realize you don't, right? There's a lot to learn about the language and how you can teach it to others in a way that is kind of easier to digest. And so the courses, I think, were challenging, but they definitely provide you with enough education to be able to go out and then actually do the thing, actually help other people learn the language a little bit easier. So that was my experience with it, at least.
I don't mind sharing my own. So I was in the same program as Sandra, but I didn't get it as my undergrad. I received it as part of my master's at CSU Stanislaus. I'm not sure if that's still an option. I think I forgot the experience of it. So yeah, it was part of my master's program, and I'm glad I have it. Many times since I spent the majority of my career abroad after 2013, I did indeed go back abroad. I had spent 5-6 years before that program abroad, mostly in Asia, Japan, South Korea. With my new master's and the TESOL certificate, I ended up teaching in Singapore. And the fellowship program, which is called the English Language Fellowship Program, the master's in TESOL would have been sufficient, but I do know people apply to the program with a bachelor's in education and a TESOL certificate as well. And that was my journey.
My journey is a little bit different. Most of my experience with being trained in TESOL was in Puerto Rico. So it's mostly built in a major and master's degree. And then pretty much else has been, again, built up in academic programs, terminal degrees, graduate and bachelor's. I do want to add something to what you mentioned, Alfredo. We do have the master's program still, and it's a new program because now it's combined with writing studies. So you can graduate with a master's in writing studies with a concentration in TESOL. So that translates into teaching opportunities in ESL programs, teaching opportunities in other programs that focus on academic literacy skills for sure. But yeah, we have it. If you're interested, let me know.
Thank you for adding that. I think that's so cool. They had different options when I was doing my master's. and I did want to do composition, and I did want to do TESOL, and I think that would have been that's a fantastic combination.
Thank you. Okay, our next question is, how have you applied your experience with TESOL in your current or past jobs?
Okay, I'll go first, I guess. I think that for me, I was kind of thinking about this question ahead of time. And, I teach primarily composition courses, so writing courses. But that comes into play, I feel, when I have students who are not native English speakers. And so in those situations, I try my best to reflect on a lot of those things that I learned when I was going through my education, my preparation for TESOL. And I try my best to, kind of implement some of those strategies. That, and also combined with the fact that I am not a native English speaker, that kind of also comes in handy because I can kind of understand a little bit that perspective, but I think it helps in understanding, kind of approaching how you teach the writing a little differently to, you kind of tailor it to those students' needs, I guess.
I would say for myself, in my work as a world language course designer, it's very important because we're talking about second language acquisition theory. So it's in my day-to-day, how I break apart activities. If I'm teaching vocab, how am I going to introduce this essential vocab in this unit? How am I going to make sure that it's comprehensible? How am I going to make sure that it's at the right level where my students are at? So I use it day to day. And I mentioned I had 2 jobs. In my TA work as well, if I do have students who are ESL learners, we're all language learners first, but I think it's important to recognize, we build opportunities to build academic language. And when I'm leading discussion courses, I'm very cognizant of that. And especially since I'm doing anthropology right now, and there's a bunch of terms that a lot of students struggle with, and because it's academic language and terms. And so I make sure that I teach in a way that respects the learner and their journey and the things that they need. So I do use it daily.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that I like to focus on, the letters in the acronym, is the T, right? Teaching. And I always say, and I don't know if it's much of a joke, but we like to think it's a joke in the TESOL field. It's like, teaching TESOL is teaching the right way, because it's like you were saying, Alfredo and Sandra, it's like breaking down, the language in a way that it's scaffolded, supported. And one of the things that I use TESOL in my teaching is making sure the students understand the different types of discourses that are in the classroom, different types of language, right? So what are the languages that the student have that they can transfer and use it to get academic language, but also more specific language, more specific scientific language, more specific type of, if it's a writing course or more language specific course, what's the language of arguments, argumentative, what's the language of, say, literary genre. So it's really making sure that we understand different languages. Oh, I'm going to call them languages. They're all legitimate ways of communication. But yeah, it's understanding that it's if you know a language, you can use it as a tool to access another type of language, right? So it's just being a little bit more language conscious in that sense.
Thank you. Okay, our next question is, would you recommend students to pursue a master's in TESOL instead of just like a bachelor's degree?
Well, like I said, I mentioned I did mine in undergrad. And so for me, doing it, getting my master's in TESOL again was kind of redundant. And so didn't, but now that I know that Mirta said there's a master's where it's like writing studies and TESOL, I would definitely recommend that one. Yeah.
I would agree with that. I think since a lot of my career has been, I'm a licensed teacher as well, and so sometimes I'll work at international schools. I could teach English, or I'll do English language acquisition, and I think that if I had the opportunity again, I would take the same degree with composition and TESOL. At that time, it wasn't offered. We had to have concentrations. But I think as has already been mentioned, TESOL is going to help you in a lot of different ways. And even if your desire is composition and you want to be in writing studies, I think it's very helpful to understand the process that English learners acquire language, how some of the best practices to teach language, and that's going to lend itself to writing instruction. So I would definitely take that master's at CSU Stanislaus if I didn't have it already. Sounds like a great program.
Yeah, I do recommend it, and I recommend it for different reasons. I think the first thing you have to think about is, I know it's hard to start thinking about the end goal. Sometimes you just graduate or overwhelmed. Oh my God, I just want a job. Should I keep going? But you should have some kind of idea, again, because you want to make decisions based on what you see yourself doing in the future. Maybe not in the long future, but in the near future. I think that, for example, and I think your choices, right, speak about, well, I would want to teach composition. So maybe that's right, made the decision a little bit more clear, right? In TESOL, because again, it's a way to open up more opportunities for employment. TESOL is great. We all want to teach. We all have passion with everything we do, but we need to find ways to be employable. And having a TESOL master's, right? If you have a bachelor's, you can work in certain areas, right? So if you have a bachelor's in TESOL that is not connected to a teaching credential, again, that limits a little bit your possibilities and opportunities. So that means that you would possibly be teaching in non-bearing courses that are non-unit bearing in community colleges, maybe one of those refugee centers. There's IRC across from campus is really good. We have partnerships with them, but it will limit you, right, with the opportunities. Now, if you can teach abroad, of course, with the certificate. Now, if you go, for example, since I said abroad last, if you go abroad with a master's degree, then you can possibly teach in colleges, again, because you go through these recruiting organizations, they send you what they need, right? So you can go teach universities. Not only that, if you go as a master's, right, you get a little bit more of curriculum and assessment. Then you can work on program development. Maybe you can even be a consultant for the district. So again, a master's, just like any other master's, is just going to open more doors. And with TESOL, again, because it's connected with education and the district, it's desperately needed. So I always recommend anybody, if anything, if you're K through 12 thinking about teaching, I think a TESOL certificate or some kind of training in TESOL is absolutely necessary. So go for the master's.
The next question is, for those who have worked abroad, could you share a bit about your experience abroad and what the application process was like?
So I began at the very beginning when I graduated from San Francisco State. I didn't have any TESOL training. I got recruited. No, there was a website that offers an opportunity for recruiters to connect with people who are interested. I only had a bachelor's. I went to South Korea. They paid for my flight, my visa, my return flight, my apartment. They gave me a decent salary. Hasn't really changed in like 20 years, sadly, over there, but they still gave me a very decent salary that I wouldn't have been able to earn in Merced, and high savings potential. And I traveled a lot, and it was very easy because that's their requirement. Now, there's a lot of different kinds of requirements, as have already been stated, but the more you have, the more options you'll have. So if you have a BA, I had a BA in film. I was still able to teach, but it was a private language institution. Not bad. It got my feet wet. I realized I really wanted to do this. I ended up pursuing my credentials and my master's at different times. Credential, you've heard, it's possible to part of your bachelor's in education, I believe, to get a TESOL certificate. That opens the doors for international schools, but a master's does definitely open up the path, not just to some international schools who can take that in lieu of a teaching license, but definitely universities. And in fact, I'm at the TESOL conference now, but I passed around the convention center, and there's a bunch of employers from different states who are looking for employees. And I picked up information from Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Taiwan, I believe, Mexico too, teach online. You could teach also online for 10 hours. And I believe it's just TESOL certificate and a bachelor's. So there's a lot of opportunities. I would say if you're looking online, there's a great resources like Dave's ESL Cafe is an old one. There's more targeted, there's a few targeted for like Korea, Taiwan. There's a couple boards you might look at. But in essence, even if you're just going to graduate and you want to get a job, let's say in the coming semester, many places will work with you. And it was my choice to pick a country that paid for everything because I was poor. I just got done with college. And so I picked someone. Korea for me was easy. But if you end up getting a master's and you have 2 years of experience after traveling abroad, there is a program I like to give a shout out to, and that's the English Language Fellowship, a master's in TESOL or education with TESOL concentration, some sort of TESOL concentration and a master's. Does open up the opportunity for fantastic career opportunities like teacher training, just a lot of things that normally is really hard to get otherwise. And I knew that I wanted to get my PhD or get into like something beyond the classroom, even if I love the classroom. And a master's definitely opens up opportunities to do that.
My experience teaching abroad is a little different. I am currently teaching abroad, if that makes sense. I am from Puerto Rico. I lived there, studied there, worked there until I decided to go for my PhD. So teaching English in Puerto Rico, it's a little bit like EFL. We use TESOL or ESL as some kind of framework though, but it's pretty much EFL. Most of the island, the speakers populations, it's monolingual speakers of Spanish. Only 20% claim some type of level of bilingualism. So in that sense, my experience teaching abroad, maybe something similar to what you experienced, both Sandra, if you have taught abroad in Alfredo, it's similar, right? Other than the fact that I'm an insider and from there, so that's a little bit different in terms of experiencing the culture. I can speak to what we've done for our students in the program, and we do have a couple of partnerships. We have partnerships with the IRC, mostly for internships. The idea of the internship is it's good because, again, you get your foot in the door and you do great, they love you, and then they give you a class, they give you two, you keep, becoming a little bit more of a active participant in an employee in the center. As far as abroad go, the way that the program goes, it really depends on the student's interest. So the advisors and we sit with them and we talk to them where they want to go. And it's mostly been Japan and South Korea. So we've developed really relationships with two organizations, one of which is EPIC, that's for South Korea, and the other one being JET for Japan. And it's pretty much recruiting organizations. You submit your paperwork. Some of them might charge you a fee for they assign you a recruiter. You have the option to get a recruiter who's going to help you, work out the paperwork. And they find need. And once they find it, they place you. We do have one student that did her master's with us, and she's been there for 3 years. Now she left during the pandemic. And she's now working in a university as a professor, and she's working on curriculum. And so it's a good opportunity to explore. I think if you wanted to explore that route, do your research, contact your advisor, we can help you. And yeah, I think it's a great opportunity. And with the TESOL certificates, I think it depends. Usually what these programs require, it's 120 hours of training. And that's pretty much what TESOL certificate online can give you. It's a very competitive market. If you want to go to Japan, everybody wants to go to Japan. Everybody wants to go to South Korea. So that's why they love us, because we give you a really well-rounded instructor. Not only they're trained in TESOL, they come with over 300 hours of training. They have over 40 hours of active tutoring in the Writing Center. They can teach a little bit of literature because we require our students to take literature courses. They can teach writing because they have to take some other writing courses. Again, they do go to the Writing Center and they tutor. So we have been very successful placing students and students of colors. I'm sorry, a student of color that have been successfully being placed in different schools or companies in both South Korea, Japan. The other venue to explore would be a Fulbright. We also have students going there, and that'll give you a little bit of wider sort of range where to go, right? We have students going to Portugal. We have students going to Mexico as well. We had one student going to Costa Rica. I guess they wanted to go somewhere a little bit warmer, right? In the Caribbean. But yeah, that's been my experience. If you have any questions, once again, let me know.
I would love to jump in as well. Everyone, hello, my name is Sakina Ali. I am a return Peace Corps volunteer. So I am here with Alfredo, even though I haven't met you yet. I'm here at the TESOL conference. So please mind my surroundings if you hear a little bit of people around. But you know, my first abroad experience was in Peace Corps, and it was right after I got my undergraduate degree. It was just, well, I shouldn't say it's right after my undergraduate degree because I did my undergrad degree. And then while I was doing my undergrad, I fell in love with being on a ship because I did semester at sea as an abroad program, and I fell in love with being on the ship. So I found a way to be working on a cruise ship. And so I did that for a while. And when I say a while, I did it for a couple of years. And during those 2 years is when I actually realized my love for TESOL or teaching others English, right? And on the cruise ship, we had a whole hierarchy of crew members. And based on their levels of English, depended on how much they got paid. And it didn't matter what their degree was. It was just how well could they communicate with passengers. The better communication that they had, the higher pay they got, because they got a position that was more active with passengers, right? And so knowing that, one of the staff members who actually worked in the crew hall, crew mess, asked me if I would help him with his English. And I said, sure, why not? And during lunch hour, I would help him with his language learning. After a couple of days, there was another person and another person. I had a class of about 30 because they were all interested. And of course, the captain came down and was like, what are you doing? And I went up to and talked to him about it, and he's like, oh, you should get paid for this. I'm like, people get paid for this? What? I can teach people. This is so much fun. This is exciting, and I'm helping them. And I got so excited about it that I was like, oh, this is an actual profession. I knew I wanted to go into education. I just didn't know exactly where and what before that. So in my undergraduate degree, I did have a minor in education. I thought I was going to be a history teacher, actually. English was not the subject that I was thinking. So while I was looking for master's degrees, thinking that I needed an MA in TESOL, right, to go and teach abroad and, have this exciting job on a cruise ship, maybe, I thought, okay, this would be great. But when I was looking through the programs for MA TESOL, I found this joint program with Peace Corps, that Peace Corps would actually pay for your MA TESOL. Well, that's what I thought. Peace Corps would pay for your MA TESOL if you do your Peace Corps experience. It is true, Peace Corps, if you do your Peace Corps experience and you teach for 2 years, then there's a lot of benefits afterwards, and that can include an MA in TESOL. And I went to American University, which honored Peace Corps and has a partnership with Peace Corps. So I had a full ride for my master's degree because of it. And that was, I didn't know that was possible. And, like maybe some of you, you're wondering like, how can you get a free education too? And that would be great if you could. And this is one wonderful pathway to do that, to go through Peace Corps, do 2 years of service, which if you're interested in working abroad anyways, this is what you're doing. You're getting 2 years of international work experience and you're teaching English. So you're getting that experience right away. They do train you those first 3 months in language and culture. They really help you integrate into that community that you're going to be serving in. And then you go do your assignment, which would be teaching in a classroom, perhaps, right? So that's kind of my path of how I started working abroad. And then I know that Alfreda, you had mentioned the State Department. So right after I finished Peace Corps, I was eligible because I got my master's degree. Then I was eligible for the English Language Fellow Program. And I thought, oh, this is perfect. This is what I want to do. I just was there at the right time, applied for it, got in, and I worked in Turkey for 2 years as an English language fellow. Oh my gosh, and I wouldn't have gotten that position if I hadn't done Peace Corps, because Peace Corps gave me that experience as well, like experience abroad, as well as a master's degree, which are 2 things that a lot of English language fellow, or for those positions, that's what they're looking for. Some experience already teaching abroad and having that master's degree. So that was kind of my trajectory. Of course, when I came back, it was a whole different story. I went into more of higher education when I came back, and I worked at a university, again, all with international students, teaching them English. I was an academic director, and that was also an amazing experience, also something that would not have happened if I hadn't done Peace Corps. And then I didn't do the English Language Fellow Program because what they were looking was for people who had experienced teaching abroad, right? They were looking for that. And of course, someone with a master's in TESOL at that time as well. So there's lots of opportunities or ways to, get yourself out there, whether it's doing Peace Corps, doing that JET program that Myrta was talking about, or going in South Korea, or finding all these other places that all the other booths that Alfredo had mentioned earlier too, that are looking for English teachers. I will say more and more they're requiring to have that TEFL certificate. More and more, they're really most most places abroad, they're, I don't know how to say it. It's like about, I want to say 10 to 20 years ago, if you spoke English, you could go teach English somewhere. Now it's not the case. You have to have that TESOL certificate or be a teacher. They want something, right? So that 120-hour certificate is a great start. That's a minimum. That's a minimum. If you can get more than that and more experience, the more opportunities that open up to you. And there are a lot. They become less competitive with the more experience you have, right? Like Martha says, very, very competitive these days. But the more experience you get, the less competitive it is, or you're the competition for others.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is what are some questions that you've had in job interviews that are related to TESOL?
I had a job interview recently, so I don't mind responding, and it wasn't about TESOL specifically, but as has already been stated, TESOL is good teaching practice, a good teaching methodology. I mean, a good approach, I should say. For the position was teacher trainer, coach position at a district in Madeira. I'm sorry, this is Stanislaus, right? Most of the students here are okay. So right here locally, and the position was really to make a lesson plan and explain my thought process. And I think that's the part, people can create lesson plans and don't have theory, but explaining the theory and the idea, this is why I did this, And if I'm working with English language learners, this is why I'm doing this. And so I think being able to talk shop, as they say, with people who are knowledgeable of second language acquisition, you could really see who really understands the theory, who's getting it, who you can have that conversation, and they can say, you know what, this individual seems prepared. And even if I ultimately took another job, not that job, it's always helpful to explain your thought process. And so in that respect, I think it's very useful.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of piggyback off of what you said, Alfredo. I'm kind of trying to think back because it's been quite a while since I've had an interview. And so I remember one of the things we had to do in preparation for the interview is you have to prepare that lesson plan and kind of walk, the people that are interviewing you through some kind of lesson plan, but you also have to explain the reasoning behind it, right? So like, what is the goal with this? What is the, what are you trying to accomplish? Why this particular lesson plan? And so definitely keeping those things in mind. You're not just going to go in and perform something. You have to actually have something to back it up, some reasoning. So it's something to keep in mind.
So it's been a while since I've interviewed for a TESOL position, I will say, but I interview others I've interviewed a lot of teachers to work with me. And so I want to say my major question that I ask is about class, about what they see as the best methodology to teach English. And I will tell you, this is my big pointer for everyone. People will say, oh, communicative teaching, using communicative teaching, but then they can't explain it fully. And they use the buzzword. And I'm thinking, okay, so tell me how you use it. How does your lesson plan go? Like Sandra was saying that a lot of people want to know about the lesson plan. I want to know about the lesson plan, but I want to know, what is a teacher interaction here? So what does that mean? What does the communicative approach really mean? So I think that is a question that I'm always wondering how people are going to answer. I'm also asking about experiences in diverse environments. So diverse from their own. So whatever that is, right? So I'm asking about that. Another question that I try to ask about, but is how willing are people to learn a new skill, right, in their teaching? And this is kind of like, do you play well in the sandbox with others, and are you willing to learn from others in your own program, right? Are you going to work with another teacher and develop something even better? Because I don't want just a teacher. I don't want someone in their silo teaching their class. I want a teacher who is ready to help each other and elevate the whole program in general, not just their class, and not just focus on just their students, but really the whole program itself. So that's what I'm looking for when I'm looking for a teacher. So the best way to be able to answer that is to get that experience. And really try to use as many resources as you can to build the skills that are needed, I say.
I think one of the things, I think most of the questions that we ask, it's basically, how do you go around teaching? And just to expand a little bit, I think what I like to tell my students when they're doing their mock interview is, I feel that there's some kind of fear. I have not taught yet. I don't have experience yet. So what am I going to say about my teaching? And the one thing that I say to them is, just go back to your classes and then work backwards, right? So it's like you were saying, rather than say, oh yeah, affective filter, communicative approach, I do a lot of task-based, go back to the activities that you worked and you developed in your course. And a lot of these activities, you know them well, you develop them, you know the reasons why. You know why you chose to do multimedia approach. You Why did you do Simon Says, for example? So just provide examples, concrete examples from either activities from past classes. If you have tutored, again, bring that back and talk to them about it, because that's exactly what's going to show them that you know what you're talking about. The other thing that I think that it's a good question to ask is, what have you learned from your learners or students? One of the things that I always tell my students to express in these interviews is that you're very student oriented. And one of the things that you focus on is on self-assessing, your self-assessment, right? So having students in a way that you've learned from them, you've found these patterns, the strategies, you use those patterns to develop strategies that work for them, right? It's going to give you a better insight as to what would work best with all of these fancy words and all of these fancy frameworks and structures that we're giving you. So give that a little bit of a thought. Again, self-reflection, and think about what you've learned from your students, that you've used it, right, to continue to learn and to improve your teaching.
Thank you. Going a little bit off, well, continue a little from there. I'd like to ask, what would you say are some challenges of teaching English?
I can just two ideas. If it's domestically, I think, are you prepared to work with English learners who are coming with like zero language skills? They may not have, English may be their third language. They may not have a strong second language. They may not have, I worked with the LD population when I was working at Merced High School, and some of the students that we would get, we would also have refugees, people fleeing Central American violence. And, a lot of these students didn't have the opportunity to really have an education where they were from for a variety of different reasons. And so sometimes, I'm working with a student who can speak Spanish, can't really read it that well. They may have their first language is a language other than Spanish. And I'm teaching English and the high school skills of using a computer and, all the things that we're doing. And so it can seem overwhelming, but to me, I think every teacher feels this, but really I would feel like this is the most important class for me and for you, because if we can have you learn English, besides graduating from this high school, the role is going to really open up to you. And I say the same thing for students who are getting their degree as well. Whatever you want to teach domestically or internationally, there's going to be challenges. Domestically is the one I listed. Internationally, I think is just whether it's in Peace Corps, whether it's whatever program, living by yourself, you have support, but basically, you're kind of out there. Like, many of our students sometimes are out there when they're living in California or living elsewhere, and they may be with their parents, they may not. And so I think it's a very rewarding field, but it does require a bit of patience because you're working with students who have the need maybe to learn English, and sometimes in their other courses, they're not even sadly paying attention to what they should be to make language accessible. And so sometimes as the ELD teacher, it would fall on me to work with the history teacher, to everyone else, and say, hey, I can work on that exam that you're giving, make sure that it's being able, my students can take it basically. And so there are challenges, but I can't think of many careers that are more rewarding, because giving someone access to a language is just a beautiful gift. I'm gonna have kids soon, hopefully, and that's what I keep telling myself is growing them up bilingual. That's such an amazing gift, and you as a teacher, you're giving that gift. And so there's difficulties, but there's a lot of reward.
One of the challenges that I want to talk, and I think when you think about challenges, it comes with I think they vary depending on the territory, right? So Alfredo, you were talking about ELD, and one of the biggest challenges is dealing with a classroom that it's very diverse in terms of proficiencies. So you have ELD designated and integrated, but it's really difficult still to create so many different versions of a lesson to accommodate every one of your students. And even if you have those two categories, right, even within the designated and the integrated, it's still diverse in terms of proficiency stages, right? So I think that's one of the more, I would say, difficult challenges, right, in an ELD K through 12 sort of context. As far as abroad, I would say EFL can be pretty restricting in a sense that mostly focuses on grammar, not so much in communication. There's a challenge of, well, now you're not in a context where you have the language you're learning pretty much around you when you get out of the classroom. So it's rooting that structure, that grammar structure that we like to, put in those lessons in EFL, but grounded in context, cultural context, opportunities for students to be able to use the language outside the classroom, because we all know if you get, even if it's 2 hours a day, it's not enough, right? If you leave it in that space, it's not going to be enough. The other thing, and I think it's more ideological in terms of challenges abroad, it's the accents. And I think maybe making people understand that pronunciation and enunciation is not the same as an accent. I think it's difficult. I feel that a lot of students, and one of the things that we find challenging in any territory is having learners to speak the target language. There's chapters being written about how to make the reluctant speaker participate more, right? So imagine if you're so focused on sounding like somebody else, right? We all know the affective filter goes up, and it's going to be a lot harder for the student to be more inclined to participate and speak and just use the language, which is a way of closing that cycle, right, or the circle for the whole acquisition process competence. So I would say that that's one of the biggest challenges, again, in both domestic and abroad. And hopefully in EFL someday they will stop doing those speech therapies for accent reduction, right? But yeah, focus on pronunciation, enunciation, accents. Accents should not be a level or some kind of measure of proficiency and competency. And that's one of the things that ideologically we have to struggle a lot in that environment.
I have a similar response in terms of something that Alfredo said too. Omita, you said this too. When it comes to, I teach primarily writing courses, composition. And so it has to do with different writing abilities. Students come into your classroom and they're at different places in terms of their writing abilities. And so as an instructor, the challenge is teaching the material in a way that isn't overwhelming for students who maybe aren't quite there yet, and isn't boring for students who maybe are a bit more advanced in their writing abilities. And so finding that healthy balance when you're teaching the material, that I think is one of the greatest challenges for me teaching composition courses.
I haven't taught for a little while, so I'm not I'm trying to think of what was the most challenging when I first started abroad. And I think the first thing that I found most challenging was that I started with teacher training, and I taught a whole course. It was a 1 month long course. And I remember at the end of the course, the teachers had said, "Oh, well, we loved your course, but it's not going to work for our students." And I thought, wow, I just taught this course for 1 whole month and you're telling me now, and I'm thinking, but in my head, I'm thinking, of course this works. It worked on you. I used all the methodology on all of the teachers the same way I would in a classroom. So if it worked on them, it's going to work on other Ukrainian students, right? Age doesn't matter. And it's funny because that's what you get like that, that feedback afterward. Oh, well, it won't work on, young kids, or it won't work on teenagers. It won't work on adults, and I just kind of break through it. And I think I did a lot about just kind of showing myself as a role model and how I would teach to help with that. So I think I just had to be strong with my own belief and know that it really works. That was the first part. And then the other part was go out and test it before you actually start teaching it too, because you want to be able to say, oh yeah, I tried that yesterday and it worked with the second grade group, or it worked with, the 11th graders. And so you might want to test it out. And, I changed the whole course. I was like, okay, they're going to watch me teach in their classes. That's how we're going to do this. And that really helped. And, they could see that it actually works. So I think that was the challenge, is that, people kind of doubted how it would work sometimes in a group that they felt like, oh, well, you know how to do this with Americans, or you know how to do this with this one group that you've been teaching for a while. How does it work with us? So I think that sometimes is something you need to learn how to navigate.
Okay, thank you. And we're getting close to the end time, so I'd like to ask my final question before opening up for the audience. The question is, do you have any advice for students who are interested in or are part of the TESOL program at Stanton State?
I would. I think Mirta kind of touched on this a little bit, kind of thinking for yourself what your end goal is, what it is that you want to accomplish, where you see yourself. I know you're probably kind of trying to make it through your classes right now and you're stressed out and all these things, but it is important to just reflect on what it is that you want for yourself, where you see yourself in terms of, what kind of degree and to what extent you want to take that academic education. But I would also argue that you should take into consideration other things like, do you want to have a family? Do you want to travel? All these things, right? You have to consider to really, I think, help you determine what kind of degree you would like to get. Do you want to go teach abroad? Do you want to stay close to home? But either way, I mean, the great thing about a degree in English is that you can do those things. You can stay home and teach here, or you can travel abroad and do those things. And so in short, I would recommend that students get a degree in English. I would recommend a master's, the master's program that Mita mentioned with the dual degree there would be great. And I definitely highly recommend it to students.
I'm gonna second that. One of the things, like we've been saying about thinking about the end goal, I want you to keep in mind that whatever decisions you make, you can always come back. So if you decide to have a lot of students that come from liberal studies, and a lot of them get a little bit torn because my window is almost closing, I have to go to credential, but I sort of want to teach abroad. You can always come back. You can go get your credentials and then go teach abroad, or teach abroad, come back and credentials. Whichever it is, think about that it will be an experience, right? And that experience will inform your decisions in the future. One of the things that I do advocate for master's degrees is because even if there's another certificate that's give you a little bit more of 120 hours and a little bit of more experience in teaching hands-on, is that you have your master's, you can do the same thing, if not more, but then it's going to help you move forward to the next step if you wanted to pursue, for example, a PhD. It's very common for people who go through a master's degree, go teach. It's like, oh my God, I want to do research because I have all of these great ideas that I am using in my classroom. And I want to make sure that I'm doing them, that there's something out there that I can attach it to, either to justify it, or if not, so I can put it out there and say, hey, I'm doing this, it works. So if you have a master's, then it would be a little bit more smooth, right? That transition to moving then forward to a PhD program. And then you'll be teaching, and then you'll be doing research. So again, think about the end goal, but if you make a decision and then you kind of regret it, don't be so hard on yourself. You can always go back. Again, TESOL is something that you can fit it in a lot of different fields, a lot of different practices. So come back to us and we'll be more than happy to have you.
I love these suggestions. I mentioned earlier, Alfredo mentioned earlier, we're at the TESOL conference. This is an international conference with over 111, I believe, countries represented here this year. And it's usually more than that even. I mean, try to join these professional organizations, get involved, see what is available out there, see what people are doing. Like Myrta said, and Sandra and Alfredo, know what your end goal is. But you know what? I did not know my end goal. I had no idea what I was doing. So also think about like what excites you, what interests you at the moment. And you, like Myrta said, you can always come back to something else or change your track a little bit. I'm going to do one more plug of Peace Corps, but if you do Peace Corps, in California, what's great about it is it counts as your preliminary credential when you come back. So you already have that under your belt. So it's like doing it simultaneously, and you get to start as a 3rd-year teacher in California. So that's one plug for California specifically with Peace Corps. It's different for each state. So that kind of, allows you to do 2 things at the same time, basically. But really, like I said earlier, get involved in some of these professional organizations, talk to people who are in that field, see what they're doing and see what different opportunities there are. I mean, I'm not in higher ed anymore at the moment. I'm now working with a federal agency, working with Peace Corps and sending people abroad and doing recruitment events and all these other things. And my track I thought was always going to be higher education, and I can always, now it feels like I could fall back on that if I want to, or go back to it, which, I do miss students. So maybe I will one day. But I am going, more towards a different like government track. You never know where things will take you, I had no idea I'd go to Ukraine and then Turkey, and then I didn't know I was going to be back here and going other places. So it's, there's a lot of opportunities out there, and you might not know exactly what direction you're in, and you don't need to know that exact direction, but as long as you have some idea of what you want to try to pursue, and then it can always change.
I would add a combination of the advice already being given, but I would state that if you don't know, if you have, I might go abroad, I might stay here. I would do this. If I had to redo my career, the one exception, that the difference that I would make is that I taught in Madeira for my first year. And here in California, we have CalPERS and STARS. It's the retirement system. I would highly recommend that if you, for whatever reason, you get into, you have an opportunity to join STARS or CalPERS, continue to pay into your dues even when you go abroad, collect those years. I've been teaching like 14, 15 years, a lot of 10 years, most of that experience is abroad. I wish I would have had paid into that. So I would be sitting on 14 years right now in the, with my retirement. That's one, that's very long term. One medium term is that wherever you're going, I think just be aware there's so many opportunities that could really fit into whatever you want to do with this degree, and be cognizant, of what's going on. So I plugged the Fulbright English teaching assistantship, just with your BA. I wanted to say Ukraine, you had me there for a minute, Romania. Next to Ukraine, I was right at the border until we weren't evacuated, but the program ended right about the time the war started. But there's so many great opportunities that I'll share this about myself. I'm always moving between teaching in public schools, high school. I'm going to teach in middle school this coming fall. I'm currently at an educational tech company, private, but I also volunteer or have aspirations or have worked in this kind of government space. And one thing I want to plug, like just to put this in your ear a couple of years down the line, is if you do end up with a master's in TESOL, one of the things that I like, besides the English Language Fellowship Program, there's this specialist positions, whether that's the English Language Fellowship specialist positions or Fulbright specialist positions. I can tell you one cool story. So my buddy, he went to Timor-Leste, and he was able to they're kind of working out like what their English language program is going to look like. And so the State Department sent him there. They empower you. He's working with the state to develop their curriculum. He comes back, he goes forward, he does this virtual thing, but he's connected to these projects around the world that are making an impact, he's making decisions that are going to change the face of how people from Timor-Leste receive English language education. And, these projects are short, but it's very cool to say, hey, we need you in Brazil. There's this program. It's very short. Can you do it? And I'm at the stage where if I didn't have a full-time job or just summers, there's summers available, that's exactly the kind of thing that I'm interested in. And it wouldn't have been possible if I didn't have my master's in TESOL, unless I was a specialist with a PhD for Fulbright. So you could already have those experiences, and it starts with a master's in or concentration in TESOL.
Yeah, and I would, if anyone ever wants to talk about the specialist program too, I was a specialist in for the State Department, and I did the fellow program. So I'm happy to talk about those things too, because I feel like they always change, your perspective and give you other, ideas of different opportunities that you can have. And then I added in the chat, but there's also Peace Corps response specialist too, which is a shorter term specialist. Usually people who are going during like a term break or a semester break will join one of those programs as well.
Thank you. We've gone a bit over the allotted time, so I would like to thank everyone for coming. Thank you for the audience who came to watch, and very big thank you for the panelists for agreeing to come here and share your experiences.
Thank you for inviting us, and I'm sure this goes for the rest of the panel. If anyone has questions, I'm sure they have our contact information. I'm always happy to help students, and in particular, domestically too. I could give you advice, but if it's abroad, that's my thing. I try to push people out the door. So if you have a question about anything like that, feel free to email me.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.